Thanks. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I'm Eric Schuster, Open University to the Left. Welcome to today's program, Open University, now in its 23rd year of presenting films and forums in Chicago. And if you want to find out more and you're watching on YouTube, you can go to openuniversityleft.org and on Facebook. Today, we remember the French radical philosopher and political leader, Daniel Bensaid, who was one of the most prominent figures of the European left of the last half century. He died recently in January of 2010. Bensaid came to prominence as a leader of the French student revolt of 1968, shortly after his break with the French Communist Party. Unlike other leaders of 1968, such as the more well-known Daniel Cohn-Bendit, Bensaid maintained a vigorous Marxist critique of politics. He traveled widely in Latin America and played an important role in the foundation of the Workers' Party in Brazil, and later became a philosophy lecturer at the University of Paris Saint-Denis. He was an outspoken proponent of the 1995 revival of labor and student movements in France and an incisive critic of neoliberal globalization. Most recently, Bensaid worked to found, last year in 2009, the Nouveau Parti Anticapitaliste, the NPA, in France. A prolific writer, his most important theoretical work, Marx La Tempestif, was published in 1995 and translated into English and published in 2002 as Marx for Our Times, Adventures and Misadventures of a Critique, which is available from Verso Books. He was also a frequent columnist in Le Monde and Libération and appeared regularly on European TV and radio. To review his life and work, Open University welcomes two of Daniel Bensaid's colleagues, Dr. Keith Mann and Patrick Quinn. Speaking second is the historian and author, Dr. Keith Mann. He's a Solidarity member in Milwaukee. He's a former staff writer for International Viewpoint and a monthly columnist for the Swiss socialist newspaper, L'Anticapitaliste. His articles have appeared in International Labor and Working Class History, the International Review of Social History, Labor History, and the French social science journal Les Mouvements Sociaux. His new book is called Forging Political Identity, Silk and Metalworkers in Lyon, France, 1900 to 1939, which is out this spring from Bergen Books. And speaking first is veteran activist Patrick Quinn, who's Northwestern University Archivist Emeritus, a novelist and a frequent contributor to the Wisconsin Magazine of History, and a colleague of Daniel Bensaid's in the international socialist current called Fourth International. Please welcome Keith Mann and Patrick Quinn.
Well, I guess by virtue of age, thank you very much, Eric. I'll begin our collective remarks. For those of you who expected to hear the governor speak today, I extend to you my apologies. In my defense, the only thing I can say is that I had the name before he did, being older than he did. So I didn't, unfortunately, copyright the name, so he took it. But what can I tell you?
Pat, can you get closer to the mic?
Sure. How does that sound?
That's better.
That's better.
Yes, I have to almost be on top of that thing, I'm afraid.
There. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Okay. To begin a discussion of Daniel Bensaid's life, where to begin? And I think I'm going to have to begin with my own initial encounters with Daniel. They date back to 1968, actually during the spring of 1968, before the great May-June events broke out in Paris of that year. And at that time, as a youth myself, I was 4 years older than Danielle. I was in the Young Socialist Alliance in Madison, Wisconsin, and all of a sudden we heard about this emerging student movement that was burgeoning at the time in Paris. And we found that the two leaders of that emerging student movement were both named Danielle. One was Daniel Cohn-Bendit, who was an anarchist, and the other was Daniel Bensaid, who was a Trotskyist. Both of them were students at the time, and they took the initiative in founding the March 22nd movement in European politics, left politics, many movements are named after the day that, the conspicuous day that they were founded. And so the beginnings of what happened, the great explosion that happened in Paris in May and June of 1968 actually began in March. And from that time on, I would have 3 encounters with Daniel. I did not really meet him until 1975. That was some 7 years after he became really quite globally known on the left, for the role that he had played in the great May June events. In 1975, as a member of the then political committee of the Internationalist Tendency of the Socialist Workers' Party, which had been expelled from the Socialist Workers' Party at that time, I spent a month in Paris in January and February of that year, and that's when I met Daniel Bensaid for the first time, and I got to see him and talk with him virtually every day during that delicious month. There's no other way but to characterize it. To meet really somebody who had become legendary, so early in his young life was really quite extraordinary for me at the time. At that time, his political organization, the LCR, the Ligue Communiste Revolutionnaire, was a growing organization gaining influence, and it had its headquarters on a small alley called the Impasse Goumenet in Paris. This was on the north side of the Rue de Saint-Antoine, if you know Paris at all, which is just west of the Bastille. And so I would go there every day, and there you would find the entire leadership of the organization, including Bensaid, doing political work, writing for their newspaper called Rouge, planning political events, planning demonstrations, and picket lines, and all of the kinds of things that revolutionary socialists are engaged in, support of workers' struggles, so on and so forth. And it was absolutely fascinating to get to meet the individuals who were in the leadership of the LCR, and especially to see Daniel Bensaid at work. And at that time, Bensaid, and I'll return to this in a bit, Bensaid was one of the, what I would say at the time, probably the 12 central leaders of the LCR. They were all young, and some of them had names that really became quite well known over the years. One that you might recognize, of course, was the one-time head of the LCR, Alain Crabine, who just retired as head of the LCR several years ago. And he was probably the most well-known spokesperson for the LCR during that period. And he had 2 brothers, Hubert Crabine and Jean-Paul Crabine, who was a medical doctor who were also in the organization. And then there was Angel Bensaid. And then there was Gilbert Ashkar, who some of you may know as he's a well-known revolutionary Marxist academic at the time. He's presently teaching at the School for Oriental and African Studies in London. In those days, nobody knew his name was Gilbert Ashkar at all. They knew him simply by the name he went by. It was one name. He was called Jabbar. Was Jabbar. A number of the leaders of the movement had simply one name in those days. And then there was Henri Weber. Henri Weber became really quite known and well known as an academic. Subsequently to the late 1960s and 70s, Henri Weber moved to the right. He is now a very prominent senator in the French Senate representing the Socialist Party, but at that time he was one of the leaders of the LCR, along with Bensaid. There was Jean-Pierre Bouvet, also very well known. I think Bouvet was probably the only leader of the LCR who was not Jewish at that time. As a matter of fact, there was people who would disparage the Trotsky